John Harper had always been a dreamer. Ever since he was a kid, he'd imagined what it would feel like to live by the water, waking up to the sound of waves lapping against the shore, stepping outside to breathe in fresh air, and spending lazy afternoons fishing or swimming. For years, that dream seemed out of reach. Life got busy, bills piled up, and John spent most of his days working long hours at an office job just to make ends meet. But deep down, the idea of owning a lakefront home never left him. Finally, after decades of saving every penny he could, John found himself standing in front of a real estate agent's desk, ready to take the plunge. He scoured listings online, visited open houses on weekends, and drove through countless neighborhoods until one day he stumbled upon it. A cozy little house tucked away on the edge of Crystal Lake. It wasn't too big, but it had everything he'd ever wanted: a private dock where he could park his kayak, a sandy shoreline perfect for morning walks, and even an in-ground pool with a breathtaking view of the sparkling blue water. When John first stepped inside the house, he felt like he'd walked into a postcard. The living room windows framed the lake beautifully, letting sunlight pour in during the day. The kitchen was small but functional, and the bedrooms were warm and inviting. Outside, the backyard felt like paradise itself. There was plenty of space for barbecues, hammocks swaying between trees, and chairs set up near the fire pit for chilly nights under the stars. Best of all, the property came with legal ownership of the dock, shoreline, and pool, all clearly stated in the deed. John couldn't believe his luck. He signed the papers without hesitation, feeling like the luckiest man alive. Moving in felt surreal. On his first night there, he sat by the water's edge, watching the moonlight dance across the surface of the lake. He thought about how far he'd come and how hard he'd worked to get here. This place wasn't just a house, it was his sanctuary, his escape from the hustle and bustle of everyday life. But as idyllic as things seemed, John soon realized that living in a gated community came with its own set of challenges. Crystal Lake Estates wasn't just any neighborhood. It was governed by a homeowners association, HOA, a group of residents tasked with maintaining rules and standards for the development. At first, John didn't think much of it. He figured the HOA existed to keep the streets clean, organize community events, and ensure everyone followed basic guidelines. What harm could that do? That's when he met Karen Wilkins. Karen was the unofficial queen bee of Crystal Lake Estates, or at least she acted like it. She chaired the HOA meetings, patrolled the neighborhood like a watchful hawk, and made sure everyone knew exactly what she thought of their lawns, pets, and parties. Some people called her Karen. Others referred to her as the enforcer. Whatever you called her, one thing was certain: she took her role very seriously. From the moment John moved in, Karen kept a close eye on him. She stopped by unannounced to introduce herself, which turned into a 20-minute lecture about trash pickup schedules and noise ordinances. Later, she sent emails reminding him not to leave his kayak on the dock overnight because it might ruin the aesthetic. John tried to brush it off, thinking maybe she was just overly enthusiastic about keeping the neighborhood nice. But then, things started getting weird. Karen began showing up more often than usual. Sometimes she'd march down to the edge of John's property, staring at his dock and shaking her head disapprovingly. Other times she'd peer through binoculars from her balcony across the lake, muttering something to herself before disappearing back inside. John couldn't figure out what her problem was. Was it the color of his patio furniture? The fact that he liked to play music while grilling burgers? Or was it something else entirely? One evening, while hosting a small gathering with friends, John noticed Karen lurking near the tree line that bordered his backyard. She stood there silently, arms crossed, glaring at the group as if they were criminals. When one of John's friends asked who she was, he laughed it off, saying, "Oh, that's just Karen. She's, very passionate about the HOA." As time went on, Karen's behavior grew increasingly bizarre. She started leaving passive-aggressive notes on John's mailbox, accusing him of breaking rules he didn't even know existed. One note read, "Your guests are using the dock improperly. Please remind them this is communal property." Another said, "Noise levels must remain low after 8 p.m. Your laughter carries." John was baffled. He double-checked his deed and survey maps, confirming once again that the dock, shoreline, and pool were legally his. So why was Karen acting like he was stealing something? He decided to confront her directly, hoping to clear up any misunderstandings. "I'm not sure why you're so upset," John said calmly during one particularly awkward encounter. "I have all the paperwork proving I own these areas. If you'd like, I can show it to you," Karen scoffed, rolling her eyes dramatically. "Paperwork can be wrong," she snapped. "Besides, everyone knows those parts of the property belong to the community. You're hogging resources meant for all of us." John sighed, realizing this wasn't going to be an easy conversation. He offered to sit down and review the documents together, but Karen refused, storming off in a huff. From that point on, it became clear that Karen wasn't interested in compromise. She saw John as a threat to her authority, someone who dared to challenge the status quo. Despite the tension, John tried to stay positive. He reminded himself why he bought the house in the first place, to enjoy peace and tranquility. He continued hosting occasional gatherings, fixing up the dock, and spending quiet evenings by the water. But deep down, he couldn't shake the feeling that Karen's vendetta was far from over. Little did he know her antics were about to escalate in ways he never expected. It was a bright and sunny Saturday afternoon, the kind of day that made John grateful for his decision to move to Crystal Lake Estates. The sky was a brilliant shade of blue, dotted with fluffy white clouds that drifted lazily overhead. A gentle breeze carried the scent of fresh grass and water, making it impossible not to feel relaxed. After a long week at work, John decided it was the perfect time to unwind and enjoy his little slice of paradise. He invited a few close friends over, people he'd known for years, the kind who didn't need an excuse to hang out. They arrived, mid-morning, bringing snacks, drinks, and laughter. By noon, the backyard was alive with activity. Someone had set up a volleyball net near the pool, while others lounged on chairs soaking up the sun. Kids ran around barefoot, giggling as they splashed in the shallow end of the pool. The grill sizzled with burgers and hot dogs, filling the air with the mouth-watering aroma of summer barbecues. John stood by the dock, watching it all unfold. He couldn't help but smile. This was exactly what he'd dreamed of when he bought the house, a place where life felt simple and joyful. As he leaned against the railing, tossing breadcrumbs into the water for the fish, he noticed Karen Wilkins walking briskly toward him. Her face was flushed, her lips pressed into a thin line, and her arms swung stiffly at her sides like she was marching into battle. "John!" she called out sharply before she even reached him. "What is going on here?" John turned, surprised by her sudden appearance. "Oh, hey, Karen," he said, trying to sound casual. "Just having some friends over, nothing fancy." Karen stopped a few feet away, hands planted firmly on her hips. "This isn't nothing, John. You're allowing unauthorized people to use the dock and the pool. These are communal areas, and you have no right to monopolize them." John blinked, momentarily caught off guard. He glanced at his friends who were now staring curiously in their direction. "Karen," he began slowly, "I've already explained this to you. The dock, shoreline, and pool are part of my property. I have the deed and survey maps to prove it. My guests aren't trespassing. They're using something I own." Karen's eyes narrowed. "That's ridiculous," she snapped. "Everyone knows these amenities belong to the community. You can't just claim them for yourself." John sighed, feeling a headache coming on. He'd hoped this argument was behind them after their last conversation, but apparently Karen wasn't ready to let it go. "Look," he said, keeping his tone calm. "If you want proof, I'm happy to show you the paperwork again. But honestly, I don't understand why we're still debating this. I'm within my rights." Karen's face reddened further, and her voice rose an octave. "You think showing me papers will solve anything? Papers can be forged. Besides, your so-called guests are disturbing the peace. People around here value quiet weekends, not loud parties." At that moment, one of John's friends shouted from across the yard, "Hey, John, toss me another soda." Another burst of laughter erupted from the group gathered by the grill. Karen whipped her head around, glaring daggers at them. "That's it," she declared, jabbing a finger in John's direction. I've had enough of your disregard for the rules. If you won't leave voluntarily, I'll call the authorities." And with that, she pulled out her phone and dialed 911. The mood shifted instantly. Conversations died down, and heads turned as everyone realized what was happening. John stared at Karen, stunned. "You're calling the police?" he asked, his voice tinged with disbelief. "For what? Having friends over to my house?" "This isn't your house," Karen shot back, her voice trembling with anger. "And those people are trespassing. Don't try to twist the truth, John. The law will decide." As Karen paced back and forth, relaying her complaint to the dispatcher, John felt a mix of emotions swirling inside him: frustration, confusion, and a growing sense of absurdity. How had things escalated so quickly? One minute he was enjoying a peaceful afternoon with friends, and the next, he was being accused of breaking the law. His guests looked equally bewildered, whispering among themselves about what to do. Finally, Karen hung up and crossed her arms, looking triumphant. "They'll be here soon," she announced smugly. "When they see the facts, you'll have no choice but to admit you're in the wrong." John shook his head, rubbing his temples. He knew arguing further wouldn't help, especially with Karen in such a combative mood. Instead, he walked over to his friends, explaining the situation quietly. Some offered to leave, not wanting to cause trouble, but John insisted they stay. "This is my home," he told them firmly. "We're not doing anything wrong. Let's just wait and see how this plays out." Minutes ticked by, each one feeling longer than the last. The cheerful atmosphere had vanished, replaced by an uncomfortable tension. Kids stopped playing, unsure of what was happening. Even the birds seemed quieter, as if sensing the conflict brewing below. Then came the sound of sirens. 2 police cars rolled up the driveway, their flashing lights casting sharp reflections off the surface of the lake. Officers stepped out, adjusting their hats as they surveyed the scene. Neighbors peeked out from behind curtains or leaned over fences, eager to witness the drama firsthand. It felt surreal, like something out of a movie. One officer approached John first, introducing himself and asking for an explanation. John recounted the events calmly, emphasizing that he had legal ownership of the disputed areas and that his guests weren't violating any laws. He handed over copies of his deed and survey maps, pointing out specific clauses that supported his case. Meanwhile, Karen launched into her side of the story, her voice rising with every sentence. She accused John of greed, selfishness, and outright defiance of HOA regulations. She gestured wildly at the pool, dock, and shoreline, insisting they belonged to everyone. Her passion was undeniable, but her arguments lacked concrete evidence. The officers listened patiently to both sides, occasionally jotting notes in their notebooks. They examined the documents John provided and asked follow-up questions to clarify details. At one point, one of the officers turned to Karen and said gently, "Ma'am, based on what we're seeing here, it seems Mr. Harper has legitimate ownership of these areas. Unless you can provide documentation proving otherwise, there doesn't appear to be any violation." Karen bristled at this, refusing to back down. "But that's impossible," she exclaimed. "How could he possibly own all of this? It's absurd. If you won't enforce the rules, then I'll take this matter to court myself." The standoff dragged on for nearly 2 hours. Officers spoke with witnesses, reviewed the property lines, and consulted with dispatch about similar cases. Throughout it all, John remained composed, answering questions politely and avoiding any confrontation with Karen. His friends did their best to keep things light, cracking jokes and offering moral support whenever possible. Eventually, the officers concluded their investigation. Addressing Karen directly, one of them said, "We understand your concerns, ma'am, but without proper documentation disputing Mr. Harper's ownership, there's nothing we can do. If you believe there's been a mistake, you may pursue legal action through civil court." With that, the officers returned to their cars and drove away, leaving behind an uneasy silence. Karen stood frozen for a moment, her face a mixture of fury and disbelief. Then, without another word, she spun on her heel and marched off, muttering under her breath about injustice and corruption. John exhaled deeply, feeling a wave of relief wash over him. The ordeal was over, for now, but he couldn't shake the sinking feeling that Karen wouldn't give up so easily. As his friends resumed their activities, cautiously returning to laughter and conversation, John gazed out at the lake, wondering how much longer he'd have to defend his right to enjoy the home he'd worked so hard to build. The aftermath of the 911 call left a strange, lingering tension in the air. While the police had sided with John and confirmed that he wasn't violating any laws, Karen's accusations had cast a shadow over what should have been a relaxing weekend. The laughter and chatter among John's friends had returned, but it was quieter now, tinged with unease. Everyone knew this wasn't just about pool parties or dock usage. It was something bigger. It was about ownership, pride, and control. And Karen wasn't done yet. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, John found himself sitting alone by the water's edge. He stared at the ripples lapping against the shore, replaying the events of the day in his mind. How had things gotten so complicated? He had never asked for trouble when he bought this house. All he wanted was a peaceful place to call his own, a retreat from the chaos of everyday life. Instead, he'd become the center of a neighborhood feud that seemed to grow more absurd by the day. Karen, on the other hand, was far from ready to let go. That evening, she stormed into her own home, slamming doors and muttering under her breath. Her husband, Greg, tried to calm her down, but she wouldn't listen. "This isn't over," she declared, pacing back and forth in their living room. "John thinks he can get away with this, but I won't stand for it. He's disrespecting the entire community." By the next morning, word of the incident had spread like wildfire through Crystal Lake Estates. Neighbors who hadn't even been present during the confrontation were buzzing with gossip. Some took Karen's side, nodding, along as she ranted about how John was hogging resources meant for everyone. Others weren't so sure. They whispered among themselves, wondering why Karen seemed so obsessed with John's property. A few people even dared to question whether she had ulterior motives. Karen wasted no time escalating her campaign. She printed flyers and taped them to lampposts around the neighborhood. The bold headlines screamed, "Is our community being divided?" Below, she listed grievances against John, accusing him of hoarding amenities, ignoring HOA rules, and causing unnecessary drama. She ended each flyer with a dramatic plea. "We must unite to protect our shared spaces before it's too late." Initially, some residents sympathized with Karen. After all, Crystal Lake Estates prided itself on being a tight-knit community where everyone looked out for one another. The idea of someone claiming exclusive rights to parts of the lakefront didn't sit well with those who believed in sharing resources equally. But not everyone was convinced. A handful of neighbors approached John privately, offering support and expressing doubts about Karen's version of events. One of these neighbors was Margaret, an elderly woman who lived 2 doors down. She had lived in the development longer than anyone else and was known for her wisdom and fairness. When she stopped by John's house a few days after the incident, he greeted her warmly, though he couldn't hide the weariness in his eyes. "John," Margaret said gently, settling into a chair on his porch, "I want you to know that I don't believe Karen's nonsense. I've seen the survey maps myself. They're clear as day. This is your property, plain and simple." John sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I appreciate that, Margaret, but it doesn't change the fact that half the neighborhood thinks I'm some kind of villain. Every time I step outside, I feel like people are watching me, judging me." Margaret nodded thoughtfully. "That's exactly why you need to fight back, not with anger, but with facts. People respect transparency. If you can show them the truth, they'll come around." Her words stuck with John. For days, he mulled over her advice, weighing his options. He didn't want to stoop to Karen's level, engaging in petty arguments or spreading rumors. But he also knew he couldn't just sit back and let her twist the narrative. He needed to take action, calmly, strategically, and decisively. The opportunity came sooner than expected. The HOA had scheduled its monthly meeting for the following week, and attendance was unusually high. Word of the dispute had drawn curious residents from every corner of the neighborhood, eager to hear both sides of the story. John arrived early, armed with copies of his deed, survey maps, and emails documenting previous discussions about property boundaries. He also brought along a professional surveyor he'd hired to verify the accuracy of his documents. If anyone doubted his claims, the expert would be there to back him up. Karen, predictably, was already seated at the front of the room when John walked in. She glanced up briefly, her lips curling into a smug smile as if she were certain of victory. Around Yan, a small group of loyal supporters nodded approvingly whenever she spoke. On the other side of the room, John noticed several familiar faces, neighbors who had quietly expressed solidarity with him in recent days. Their presence gave him hope. When the meeting began, the HOA president called for order and invited both parties to present their cases. Karen went first, launching into a passionate speech about community values and the importance of shared spaces. She waved her arms dramatically, pointing out examples of how John's actions supposedly disrupted harmony in the neighborhood. Her voice trembled with emotion as she accused him of greed and selfishness, painting herself as the defender of justice. The audience listened intently, some nodding along while others exchanged skeptical glances. When it was finally John's turn to speak, he stood calmly, making eye contact with everyone in the room. "I understand why this issue might seem confusing," he began, his tone steady and measured. "But the truth is actually quite simple. I own the dock, shoreline, and pool. I have legal documentation proving it. There's nothing hidden or deceptive about my claim." He held up the survey maps, passing them around for others to examine. Then he introduced the surveyor, who stepped forward to explain the technical details in layman's terms. Using a projector, the surveyor displayed aerial images of the property, clearly marking the boundary lines. These maps confirm that Mr. Harper's ownership extends to the areas in question, the surveyor concluded. There's no ambiguity here. The room fell silent as people studied the evidence. Even Karen's closest allies shifted uncomfortably in their seats, realizing her arguments lacked substance. When she tried to interrupt, insisting the maps were flawed, the HOA president raised a hand to silence her. "Let's focus on facts," he said firmly. "Emotions won't solve this problem." For the first time since the conflict began, Karen faltered. Her confidence wavered as neighbors started asking tough questions she couldn't answer without resorting to vague accusations or baseless speculation. By the end of the meeting, it was clear that public opinion was shifting. Many attendees thanked John for presenting such thorough documentation, admitting they hadn't fully understood the situation until now. Still, Karen refused to concede defeat. As the meeting adjourned, she gathered her remaining supporters and vowed to escalate the matter further. "If the HOA won't protect our rights," she announced loudly, "then I'll take this to court. Justice will prevail." Her declaration sent a ripple of unease through the crowd, but John remained unfazed. He knew lawsuits were expensive, time-consuming, and unlikely to succeed given the overwhelming evidence in his favor. For once, he felt confident that the worst was behind him. In the weeks that followed, the neighborhood slowly began to heal. While some tensions lingered, most residents chose to move past the drama, focusing instead on building a stronger, more transparent community. John became more involved in local initiatives, attending meetings regularly and advocating for clearer communication between homeowners and the HOA. His efforts paid off, earning him newfound respect among neighbors who had once doubted him. Though Karen continued to grumble under her breath, her influence waned significantly. Without concrete proof to support her claims, her credibility crumbled. Eventually, she resigned from her position as HOA chairperson, citing personal reasons. No one pressed her for details. As summer turned to fall, John found himself reflecting on everything that had happened. It hadn't been easy, but he had stood his ground, and in doing so, he'd gained something far more valuable than peace of mind. He had earned the trust and admiration of his neighbors, transforming a potential disaster into an opportunity for growth. And as he sat by the lake, watching leaves drift lazily across the water, he realized that sometimes, standing up for yourself isn't just about winning, it's about finding common ground even in the unlikeliest of places. The fallout from the heated HOA meeting rippled through Crystal Lake Estates like a stone dropped in still water. While some neighbors had begun to see John's side of the story, others remained firmly entrenched in their beliefs, siding with Karen and her crusade against him. The community, once united by shared values and a love for the lake, now found itself divided into two camps: those who supported John and those who rallied behind Karen. Karen, determined not to let go of her cause, doubled down on her efforts. She plastered more flyers around the neighborhood, each one more dramatic than the last. One flyer read, "Our community is under threat." Another warned, "Don't let greed destroy what we've built together." Her language grew increasingly inflammatory, painting John as a selfish outsider who cared only about himself. She even started a petition demanding that the HOA revoke John's membership privileges until the dispute was resolved. Her tactics worked, at least partially. A small but vocal group of residents began avoiding John altogether, refusing to make eye contact or exchange pleasantries when they passed him on the street. Some went so far as to boycott his backyard gatherings, claiming they didn't want to be associated with someone accused of breaking HOA rules. For John, this sudden isolation stung deeply. He had moved to Crystal Lake Estates hoping to build friendships and become part of a close-knit community. Now, he felt like an outcast in his own home. But not everyone turned their backs on him. In fact, the controversy had a surprising effect. It brought some neighbors closer to John. People who had previously been neutral or indifferent suddenly stepped forward to offer support. Margaret, the elderly woman who lived 2 doors down, became one of John's most vocal advocates. She organized informal coffee meetups at her house, inviting curious residents to hear John's side of the story firsthand. At these gatherings, John patiently explained the legalities of his property ownership, showing copies of his deed and survey maps while answering questions calmly and respectfully. One neighbor, a young father named Tom, admitted during one of these meetings, "I'll be honest, I thought you were being greedy at first, but after hearing all the facts, I realize Karen's just blowing this way out of proportion. You're not doing anything wrong." Another neighbor, Lisa, chimed in, "It feels like Karen's using this whole thing to stir up drama. I mean, how many times do we need to see the same maps before we get it? This is your land, John. End of story." These moments of solidarity gave John hope. Slowly but surely, the tide of public opinion began to shift. More people started questioning Karen's motives, wondering why she seemed so obsessed with controlling. What happened on John's property? Was it really about protecting the community, or was there something else driving her behavior? Meanwhile, Karen's relentless campaigning began to backfire. Her exaggerated claims and lack of concrete evidence made her seem less credible over time. When she accused John of intimidating other residents into supporting him, several people publicly denied her allegations, calling them baseless and unfair. Others pointed out that Karen's refusal to accept the truth was causing more division than John ever had. Despite the growing backlash, Karen refused to back down. Emboldened by her core group of supporters, she announced plans to file a lawsuit against John, alleging that his use of the dock and shoreline violated HOA bylaws. This decision shocked many residents who saw it as an unnecessary escalation. Even some of Karen's closest allies expressed doubts, privately admitting they didn't want to see the dispute drag on any longer. John, however, wasn't intimidated. If anything, he felt more determined than ever to protect his rights and his reputation. He hired a lawyer specializing in property disputes, ensuring he was fully prepared for whatever legal challenges lay ahead. His attorney reviewed the case thoroughly, concluding that Karen's lawsuit had little chance of succeeding. "She can try," the lawyer told John, "but based on the evidence, I don't think she'll get very far." While waiting for the legal process to unfold, John focused on rebuilding trust within the community. He reached out to neighbors who had been hesitant to take sides, inviting them to casual get-togethers where they could ask questions and voice concerns without judgment. He also suggested forming a new committee within the HOA dedicated to clarifying property boundaries and improving transparency. The idea quickly gained traction, with several residents volunteering to help draft clearer guidelines for future disputes. This proactive approach earned John even more respect. Neighbors began to see him not as a troublemaker, but as someone willing to work toward solutions rather than dwell on conflict. Even those who had initially sided with Karen started to soften their stance, realizing that John wasn't the villain she had made him out to be. Karen, on the other hand, found herself increasingly isolated. As more people distanced themselves from her campaign, her frustration boiled over. She lashed out at anyone who dared question her authority, accusing them of betrayal and cowardice. Her behavior alienated even her most loyal supporters, leaving her with only a handful of die-hard followers. The turning point came during a special HOA meeting called to address ongoing tensions. Dozens of residents attended, eager to resolve the issue once and for all. When Karen took the floor, her tone was defensive and combative. She ranted about how John's actions were ruining the spirit of Crystal Lake Estates, ignoring calls from the audience to stick to facts. When pressed for evidence to support her claims, she faltered, unable to provide anything beyond vague references to community values. When it was John's turn to speak, he approached the podium with quiet confidence. Instead of attacking Karen, he thanked everyone for coming and reiterated his commitment to finding common ground. "I understand that disagreements happen," he said, "and I know emotions are running high. But at the end of the day, we're all neighbors. We share this beautiful place, and none of us wants to see it torn apart by conflict." He then outlined his proposal for the new committee, emphasizing its potential to prevent similar disputes in the future. "Let's focus on transparency and communication," he urged. "If we work together, we can make Crystal Lake Estates stronger, not weaker." The room erupted in applause, with many attendees nodding in agreement. Even some of Karen's former supporters stood to clap, signaling their approval of John's plan. For the first time in months, there was a sense of unity in the air, a glimmer of hope that the community could move past its divisions. As the meeting drew to a close, Karen sat silently, her face pale with disbelief. She had expected to sway the crowd with her fiery rhetoric, but instead she had lost them completely. When the final vote was cast, approving John's proposal for the new committee, she stormed out of the room, slamming the door behind her. In the days that followed, Karen's influence continued to wane. Without the backing of the majority, her threats of legal action carried little weight. The lawsuit she had promised never materialized, likely because her lawyer advised against pursuing such a weak case. Defeated and humiliated, Karen quietly stepped down from her role as HOA chairperson, retreating into the background. For John, the victory was bittersweet. While he was relieved to finally put the controversy behind him, he couldn't help but feel sorry for Karen. He wondered what had driven her to act the way she did. Was it insecurity? A need for control? Or simply a misunderstanding that spiraled out of hand? Whatever the reason, he hoped she would find peace. As life at Crystal Lake Estates returned to normal, John noticed subtle changes in the community. Neighbors greeted each other more warmly, and conversations flowed freely without the tension that had lingered for so long. The new committee proved to be a success, fostering open dialogue and preventing minor disagreements from escalating into full-blown conflicts. Looking back, John realized that the ordeal had taught him valuable lessons about resilience, patience, and the importance of standing up for oneself, even when it felt like the entire world was against you. It hadn't been easy, but in the end, it had brought him closer to the very thing he had always wanted, a true sense of belonging. Months had passed since the heated HOA meeting, and life at Crystal Lake Estates began to settle into a new rhythm. The controversy that had once divided the neighborhood slowly faded into memory, replaced by a renewed sense of unity and cooperation. For John Harper, it felt like turning a page in a long and complicated chapter of his life. Though scars remained, both visible and invisible, he couldn't deny that something remarkable had emerged from the chaos, a stronger, more transparent community. The new committee John had proposed became the cornerstone of this transformation. Dubbed the Community Harmony Committee, its members included a diverse mix of residents, young families, retirees, longtime homeowners, and newcomers like John himself. Their mission was simple yet powerful: to foster open communication, clarify property rights, and mediate disputes before they escalated. At their first official meeting, John volunteered to serve as co-chair alongside Margaret, the wise elderly neighbor who had been one of his earliest supporters. Together, they worked tirelessly to create guidelines that balanced individual ownership with communal interests. One of the committee's early initiatives was hosting a series of workshops designed to educate residents about property boundaries and HOA rules. They invited local surveyors, real estate attorneys, and mediators to speak, ensuring everyone walked away with a clearer understanding of their rights and responsibilities. These sessions proved wildly popular, drawing crowds far larger than anyone expected. Neighbors who had once avoided each other now sat side by side, exchanging notes and sharing laughs over coffee and donuts. It was a small but significant step toward healing old wounds. For Karen Wilkins, however, the changes were harder to accept. After stepping down from her role as HOA chairperson, she retreated into near-total isolation. Her once frequent patrols around the neighborhood ceased, and she stopped attending meetings altogether. Some speculated that she felt too embarrassed to face her former adversaries. Others believed she simply didn't see the point anymore. Whatever the reason, Karen's absence left a noticeable void, but also an opportunity for the community to redefine itself without her divisive influence. Despite her withdrawal, John made a conscious effort to reach out to Karen. He knew how much pride she had invested in her role within the HOA, and he understood that losing it must have been devastating. One crisp autumn afternoon, he knocked on her door, holding a plate of homemade cookies he'd baked earlier that day. When Karen opened the door, her expression shifted from surprise to suspicion. "What do you want?" she asked curtly, arms crossed tightly over her chest. "I just wanted to check in," John replied, offering her the plate. "Thought maybe we could talk." Karen hesitated, glancing at the cookies as if they might be poisoned. Finally, she sighed and stepped aside, allowing him to enter. Inside, her home was immaculately clean, every surface gleaming under the soft glow of overhead lights. She motioned for him to sit at the kitchen table while she poured 2 cups of tea. They talked for nearly an hour, though the conversation started awkwardly. John thanked her for her years of service to the HOA, acknowledging the hard work she had put into maintaining the neighborhood. At first, Karen seemed guarded, brushing off his compliments with muttered responses. But as the minutes ticked by, her defenses began to soften. She admitted that she had always cared deeply about Crystal Lake Estates, wanting nothing more than to preserve its beauty and harmony. "I never meant to cause trouble," she said, quietly staring into her teacup. I guess I got carried away. Everything felt so personal." John nodded, sensing the vulnerability beneath her words. "I get it," he said. "You were trying to protect what mattered to you, so was I. Maybe neither of us handled things perfectly, but we're here now. That's what counts." By the end of their visit, Karen even managed a faint smile. Rare sight these days. While they didn't part ways as friends, there was a mutual understanding between them. For the first time in months, John felt like they might actually be able to move forward. As winter approached, Crystal Lake Estates transformed into a winter wonderland. Snow blanketed the rooftops, trees sparkled with frost, and the lake froze over, inviting skaters and sledders to enjoy its frozen surface. The holiday season brought neighbors together in ways no one had anticipated. Someone suggested organizing a community-wide Christmas celebration, complete with caroling, hot cocoa, and a tree lighting ceremony. The idea took off instantly, with volunteers pitching in to decorate the common areas and plan activities for all ages. John played a key role in coordinating the event, working closely with Margaret and other committee members to ensure everything ran smoothly. On the night of the celebration, the entire neighborhood gathered around a towering evergreen adorned with twinkling lights. Children laughed as they tossed snowballs, while adults exchanged gifts and shared stories by the warmth of a roaring bonfire. Even Karen made an appearance, lingering on the fringes of the crowd but smiling faintly as she watched the festivities unfold. It was during this celebration that John realized something profound. The conflict hadn't destroyed the community, it had strengthened it. Facing adversity had forced everyone to confront uncomfortable truths about themselves and their neighbors. In doing so, they had discovered the value of empathy, compromise, and collaboration. Crystal Lake Estates wasn't perfect. It never would be, but it was better than it had been before. In the spring, as the snow melted and the first buds appeared on the trees, John stood on his dock, gazing out at the shimmering water. The scars of the past year were still there, the memories of tense confrontations, sleepless nights, and strained relationships, but they no longer weighed him down. Instead, they served as reminders of how far he and his neighbors had come. He thought back to the day he'd bought the house, standing in awe of its beauty and potential. Back then, he hadn't imagined the challenges he'd face or the lessons he'd learn. But looking at the vibrant, thriving community around him now, he knew it had all been worth it. This place wasn't just a house or a piece of land. It was a home, built not just with bricks and mortar, but with trust, resilience, and shared experiences. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting golden light across the lake, John smiled. Life at Crystal Lake Estates wasn't always easy, but it was beautiful, and that was enough.